So, Bradley, how excited are you? We're what, T minus 2 weeks until your book launch?
Yeah, just 2 weeks out. It comes out on January 18th, so just shy of 2 weeks. It's very exciting to say the least.
And you're going to go on tour. Is it going to be a virtual tour? And maybe, well,
Well,
I guess Omicron has kind of, you know,
Omicron,
ixnayed
COVID is
that.
COVID is the gift that keeps on giving. It is constant upheaval. We had a number of in-person events scheduled, and they have all moved online. We're doing a global launch of the book on January 18th, starting in the APEC region, moving to the EMEA, and then the Americas.
Oh,
So
wow. You're going to
uh,
be like the fireworks rolling across New Year's
yeah, it's
Eve.
just like New
Time
Year's
zone.
Eve. It is. And we wanted to do it because the super age decoding our demographic destiny is a global look at our new demographic future. And it was important to me that because so many of the rich examples of what's working and quite frankly, what's not,
Yeah.
are happening in every region of the world.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely. Well, this
suppose,
is a global podcast, and we're going to
exactly.
dig into all of that. But I
Good.
first want to ask you a little bit about the timing because, we are awash. Even before this infernal pandemic that keeps
Mm,
on giving, we're awash in alarmist headlines, screaming headlines about the silver tsunami and,
sure.
how that's going to decimate our public spending. Why did you decide that, okay, we need to move away from that very detail driven, specific line of debate? We need to broaden things out and look at the demographic upheaval that's
Mhm.
underway.
Well, it's a bit like getting stuck in the mud. If you constantly focus on the bad will happen. But if you're able to pivot the conversation to one that focuses on a more just and equitable future, well, then you can make that happen. There are realities that we are going to have to confront in the super age. We are going to have to manage our pension systems differently. The way we distribute and give care to people will have to change. We will have to leverage technology in many cases, um, but we have no choice but to change. So why not make that change opportunistic rather than fatalistic? That's where the conversation needed to go. And quite frankly, Susan, when I got in this space of aging and longevity, which was nearly 25 years ago, which is hard to believe, um, the only conversation was gloom and doom.
Yeah.
That's all anybody talked about. And when I came into AARP in about 2004, that was my goal.
Explain
Turn.
what that was, though, because we do have. I'm big in Zimbabwe for some reason,
Mhm.
so they won't know what AARP is. So
Yes,
I
sure.
haven't really done the Wikipedia blurb about
Yeah.
what you've done. So
So for your listeners, AARP is the largest membership organization in the world outside of the Catholic Church. There are 38 million members in this US based organization that are over the age of 50. It's an advocacy organization. It's a place where you can buy products and services. It's a media company. It's all things wrapped into one. My work at ARP was really centered in the public policy, research, and advocacy arenas. And my work was almost exclusively overseas. So I worked extensively in Europe, in Asia, in Brazil. I built relationships with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD in Paris, as well as the World Economic Forum and the Asian Development Bank.
So you've been with these big ticket influential organizations, and there might be arguably a view about what WEF is doing now, the World Economic Forum. Not everybody's buying this, the Great Reset by the billionaires
Mhm.
and the gazillionaires.
Yep.
Anyway, we'll set that aside for now. But so you've been examining the collapse of fertility and the rapid aging of the population since
Mm-hmm.
the Second World War. You've been digging into all of this, and
Yes.
and in a consultant, well, now you do it as a consultant with your
Mm-hmm.
own company, the Super Age. And before, as you say, you were doing it for, I had no idea that it was second only to the church,
Well,
the Catholic. Unbelievable.
and the membership's bigger than Canada's population. So
What?
it's,
I'm
I
Canadian.
know
Really?
it's a bit jaw dropping, but yes, it's a very large organization, and it
Wow.
has about $2 billion a year in revenue. So it's quite a big place that
Well,
has
let's
fingers in just about every jar.
let's get some definitions going then. When you
Mm-hmm.
talk about superage, and I mean, take us through what's happened since the Second World War in terms of how what used to be the population pyramid has now
Mm-hmm.
become a pillar, and
Yep.
that's not going to change unless, it's not preordained, but it's not going to change
Yep.
tomorrow unless we all collectively sound the bells about this and
Mm-hmm.
policymakers get in league with other institutions and we change the infrastructure and dot dot
Yeah.
dot
Yeah.
over
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. I mean, it actually goes back further than the Second World War. What few people realize is that this is not the first time in our history that we've had some challenges around birth rates. Our birth rates dipped, became stagnant from about the end of the First World War to the end of the Second World War. People tend to not like to have babies during bad periods of time. It's, surprise, surprise, people like to have babies when there's a more hopeful future in front of them. But our demographic transition has been happening now for just over 200 years. It's really only the last 100 years where things have really sped up. And a lot of the reason why our demographic transition occurred is because of our own ingenuity.
Yes.
We were able to figure out food sanitation and water. We were able to ensure that vaccines were distributed. Science took over in many cases. We solved for youth mortality. That was our thing that we did. We got so good at it that we actually caused the global population to explode. So about 100
Yeah.
years ago, our global population was only about 2 billion people. And today it's approaching 8 billion.
That's
And
astonishing.
it is really an astonishing feat. I think it is the greatest achievement of mankind. And we never talk about it. And it is just awe-inspiring. But of course, with every solution comes more problems.
Yeah.
So we have to figure out what these new realities mean for us and how we adapt to them and in spite of them.
Well, the thing is, when I was talking about post-war, post-Second World
Mm-hmm.
War, I was really talking about, things that I've delved into here with, Mark Friedman,
Mm-hmm.
CEO of Encore. .org, the social organization, just looking at the age apartheid, the
Mm-hmm.
retirement class. We need to sort of wind things back now that we have a collapse in
Sure.
fertility on a global basis. So I
Mm-hmm.
want you to tease out some of that for us to draw us that big picture, how we changed and how our labor forces changed and how
Mm-hmm.
we made this new retirement class. We started to shove
Yeah.
older people out of work when that wasn't the case before
Yeah.
the
It, it's
50s.
it's really artificial. It was an artificial market challenge that developed here because 1950s labor force participation rates for men, at least in the United States, were nearing 50% for people over the age of 65. And that collapsed to about 14%, its lowest point by the 1990s. So
14% by the 1990s. Let's just linger
14%.
there.
Yeah,
That's
it's
extraordinary.
it's so upsetting. It's so upsetting. So I entered the workforce in the late 90s, early aughts. I entered a workforce where there were no older people. There was no opportunity to get mentorship. The oldest person in an organization was, 50, maybe 60 years old, if you were lucky.
Yeah.
I had no opportunity for that because we had created a retirement class.
Mhm.
And it was almost happenstance the way different trends came together, but they did come together to create it. First, we created this universal pension. This is new. Universal pensions are new. They started with Bismarck in the late 1800s in the US and other Western nations. They came about mostly in the 20th century, also in the East. This allowed people to leave work, and it put a time on when they should leave too. So around 65 years old. At the same time, post-war, we had this explosion of population with the baby boom. So all of a sudden, we have a mechanism to move people out of work And we have a glut of labor. We
Yeah.
have this just immense amount of cheap labor. Then, because why not, globalization occurs. So
Yes.
now we're able to find cheaper labor in different places. So older people, which historically achieved greater salary later in life because of their expertise, because of the value of their wisdom, were now a line on the balance sheet to be erased.
Yes.
And yes, there is ageism. It is prevalent everywhere. It is one of the only biases that we actively engage in, all of us, on a regular basis. But a lot of times it's bottom line. People cost too much. And when you're asked to make cuts and you can get 3 people for the price of one, people tend to take the 3 people.
But this is the myopic short-termism that happens. And globally,
100%.
when we pull out and we look at that worldview, what's
Mm-hmm.
happening to the planet, I mean, to me, it's, and I know you're on board with this, it's very
Oh,
much a big
100%.
slice of the sustainability issue. And all we hear from environmentalists is all the doom, all
Mm-hmm.
the negatives, and all the social
Mm-hmm.
burden, and how are we going to care for all these old people? Well,
Mm-hmm.
don't shove them aside. Let them keep contributing to the tax base. Let them get there, instead of macular degeneration, let's use the stem cells and let's keep them
Right.
going
Right.
until, let's compress the morbidity until the end, which we're not doing yet. It's all far off, and people say you're tinkering with Mother Nature. But sorry, I'm wrapping a lot into that. But the
No, I
point is, we need to really take that macro view that I find absolutely fascinating, and we
right.
don't have time. We don't have a lot of time to arrest the wholesale collapse of
Yeah.
fertility around the
Yeah.
world, bar Africa.
Well, and some parts of Latin America. I mean, there are a number of things that are happening with fertility. I think you've highlighted that. There is a choice that's happening with women and men deciding whether or not to have children. Education has been one hell of a good birth control. Um, our ability to have families has changed. It costs a lot to have kids. The economic framework and realities around a family have shifted completely. Children are no longer net producers, they're net consumers of our wealth, until, of course, they reach adulthood. But, my grandfather was born in 1914, and he was in the mills. He was actually in the mines, rather, by the time he was 14 years old. You can't find a 14-year-old working in the mines anymore. That just
No, and
doesn't
we don't want to
happen.
go back to that future. But
No.
there's a different way to segment out the new life stages, the multi-stage life. I've got
Exactly.
I've got Professor Andrew Scott's
Right.
seminal book, The 100-Year Life, top of the pile here, right next to
Yep.
yours. And we need to be looking at how we keep people involved and engaged,
Mm-hmm.
multi-generational, all of these big ticket issues. But also, we've got a disappearing workforce. So, are we going to start to incentivize people to start having babies? But then these people that are in the procreation stage of their lives, premenopausal women
Mm-hmm.
and thrusting men out there, getting all of the pie, the economic pie.
Mm-hmm.
What are we going to do when we've gutted the unions, when
Mm-hmm.
capitalism seems to be on its knees, it's not working
Mm-hmm.
for anyone but the 1%? We have some real structural problems.
I think first we have to address whether or not we need this many people on the planet. I mean, we've really stressed the planet up until this point with 8 billion people. So a contraction of population isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's a bad thing if we do nothing to embrace it.
Yes.
That's where there's a big disconnect, because pushing people out into retirement through forced redundancy is silly. Our market conditions today and for the foreseeable future look a lot like the post-war period. We need people to work. And that post-war period was a golden age for workers in capitalist market-based societies. In the US, that's where we got corporate pensions, corporate healthcare. All of that was born from a scarcity of labor. So things may cost a little bit more in the future because we have to pay people what they're worth, but we're going to be a lot better for it. I can guarantee you that.
Well, are you finding as you go out there your company is the Super Age, title of your book as well. Are you finding when you go and you are talking about the demographic upheaval that I keep stressing, it is permanent.
Mm.
We can't roll it back within the next 30 years. We
Correct.
can't course correct completely. We can tinker around the edges of it, but we can't course correct completely unless
Mm.
there was some global world order and power that could wave the wands.
But
I
you're
mean,
still waiting. You're still waiting 20 years for somebody to be a mature worker, like to actually be ready to work. Like humans, we just don't reproduce us quite easily like that. Instead, you've got to take time to nurture and to educate and to grow the person. We just can't, like you said, we just can't snap our fingers and have the reality of babies happen.
yes.
It just doesn't work that way.
But are you, when you're out there consulting with some very influential big ticket, multinationals,
Mm-hmm.
what are they telling you? Are they looking in this way, this big picture way, and
Yeah.
adjusting their policies, or are they still short-termist thinking and bottom
Yeah.
line and get rid of the,
Uh,
instead of retrain, or never even mind retraining, but get on the multi-generational bandwagon and keep older people who want to work and who are capable of working in
mhm.
work?
Yeah. Well, the companies that I work with are, and it's because I require them to be. That's a condition of partnership. We're not a transactional organization. We believe in money just as much as mission, and vice versa. We want to change the world, and in order to do that, we need to be working with partners, businesses, nonprofits, governments, in some cases, that are really willing to make that change. And on the workforce side of things, we tell companies all the time, you have to invest in a new business case for workers. And that business case is that they're going to have to compete for new talent, either through benefits or salary. They're most likely going to need to augment their workforce with technology, AI, and automation. They're going to have to support, for the first time, seriously support their workers with caregiving leave and flexibility. And whether they like it or not, they're going to have to extend the working lives of every single employee through either ergonomics or education. It's just part of the New Deal. And businesses that are willing to get behind it, they see that our future is different. They see that in order to grow their bottom line, they have to expand their generational reach. It's no longer searching for new markets. We can't just open up in Africa and say, look at us, we found a new market. Our new market today is one that's generationally diverse. That's what the future is for us. As long as you and I will be alive, that's the future that's here. So those businesses that get on board with this, they take that business case and they apply it to their human resource practices, whether they're recruiting or retaining individuals. Then they take those people, that generationally diverse workforce, 5 generations in some cases, 6 in the most advanced ones, and they incorporate these individuals into their innovation and design practices, both formally and informally. And then, surprise, surprise, they're able to talk to a diverse set of audiences better because the diversity in generations helps them identify blind spots in the same way that we've identified blind spots with companies by increasing gender diversity or racial diversity or sexuality within an enterprise. We can do better when we are more diverse and manage well.
Yeah, we can. And yet, ageism and lookism and classism and racism and all of the ism, sexism, I mean, it's so sticky and
They linger.
yeah, non-stop. And I just find that for me, I'm mired in, I'm reading all the articles and looking at what's happening, but I still find that with all the demographic shape shifting that's gone on
Mm-hmm.
since the 1900s and since the Second World War, there still doesn't seem to be the urgency that
Mm-hmm.
this phenomenon, this global phenomenon, demands.
Mm-hmm.
Are you seeing, because you're working out there at the coalface more so than
Yeah.
I am, here at home doing podcasts about it and reading? What are you seeing that people are waking up to it? People,
People are
not maybe
waking
not the
up.
corporates, but
Oh
the
no,
people you meet day to
I would
day.
say quite a few corporates are waking up to it. There's a lot of aha moments that are happening for folks now. I think if we're talking specifically about aging,
Mm.
um, aging is something that affects everyone every day. You can ask just about anyone on the street, have you had to work with a parent or a loved one who's gotten old and needs care? Virtually everyone will say yes at this point. But I think in terms of the demographic shift, it's a bit like our challenges with climate change in particular. It's only in recent years that corporates have gotten on board with the change because they see how it affects their bottom line. Businesses, listed businesses on the stock exchanges, they're interested in quarterly reports, their quarterly earnings. At the end of the day, that's really all that drives them. There's not a great interest in mission. They're not trying to change the world necessarily. They're trying to make money. And the reason that climate change has become a thing now for corporates is because it threatens their bottom line. Demographic change is the same thing. It's the same way. And I think what's happening, I know what's happening, is that businesses are starting to wake up to this new demographic reality. Yeah. The fact that they're having a hard time putting bodies in chairs or on the factory floors. They're struggling to increase their margins because they're only talking to younger populations and not older ones. So there's a clear and present threat to businesses now that this demographic change brings that will spawn innovation and will spark opportunity. And the forward-thinking ones are already there. They're already there. They're incorporating generational diversity, differing abilities and needs into their product and service design. They're not always perfect, but they're trying. No one's going to be perfect at this because this is a novel era. It is a new period for humanity. It has never happened before that 1 out of 5 people within our countries, at least one out of 5 people, that is going to be over the age of 65. And
well, even just last year, over 60 and under 5s, there are more 60-year-olds than under 5s. And what is it? By 2030, the World Health Organization says there will be more 65-year-olds than under 18s. I mean, this is happening. So every 6th person you're going to be passing on the street is going to be over 65. And I hate to do that thing that census takers do where they plus 65, in the Philippines it's plus 40, and not segment out the various age stages. Because
I will say that we're getting better at that. We're not perfect at it because all of these systems, all of these different institutional pieces have trained us to say 65 plus.
Yeah.
We think of it as retirement age. We think of it as, when you get your Medicare, that's what we think about with 65. And we've always just said 65 plus and leave it at that. But as the populations of older people have grown, and they've grown substantially, 80 plus is now the fastest growing demographic in the world, followed by people over the age of 100. That's pretty remarkable. Yeah. They're also going to be an explosive force within the workplace. Just a few weeks ago, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics released data on the reality that over 75s will grow by 100% in the workforce over the course of over the course of this decade. But 16 to 24s.
There was no blaring headline about that.
No blaring headline.
That was just buried. It's like of the ONS statistics, the Office of National Statistics here. And people say, oh, well, we're not getting, life expectancy is shrinking. I say, oh, the rate is just slowing down. It's a COVID haircut. It's not a big deal. The broad trend is still huge, So I want you to dig into some more of those, the statistics. Paint us that detailed statistical picture globally, what's happening in Asia, the population and the fertility collapse, all of that.
Sure. I mean, when you say fertility collapse, I want to put a fine point on that because there are 2 things that are happening right now. One is that birth rates are slowing. They're contracting. And that's oftentimes by choice. People don't want to have children. There are some questions that have arisen around fertility as well. Are men as fertile as they have been in the past? And data suggests that they're not.
I mean, I guess I'm thinking though more about birth rates. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think just
because the economy is so hard to, I think a lot of people just say, can I raise a kid? Do I have a job that isn't flipping burgers at a fast
Hmm.
food chain? You know, we've gutted the labor market in so many ways. There's no protections. And, you know, as I said I don't know when I said it, but the 1% richer.
Hmm.
I mean, COVID has proved we're not in a trickle down world economy.
No, no, trickle down economics don't work.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, Sorry to be absolute, but they really
No, but
don't.
I agree. And the relentless rise in inequality,
Hmm.
health, financial, all of that, you
Yep.
know, that is causing people to, I mean, people who would love to have children, they just think, I can't even feed myself. I can't
Right.
keep myself in a good, sustainable job.
Yeah, I think though again it comes back to the ability to have kids, but even when we've created conditions, countries like France, the Nordic countries have really worked to create conditions that support motherhood, fatherhood. Um, they aren't seeing an increase in their birth rates. And these are countries that are really making a pretty valiant attempt. Um, the birth rates are still on par with the US, which is not great.
But isn't that
And
because women are now working? I mean, it's no longer just the men that attach their
mhm.
identity to their professions.
Oh,
We women like working, and we don't
absolutely.
all want to be stuck at home with, I mean, in the Nordic countries, of course, they have much better social welfare and parental welfare and all of
Hmm.
that. But I think, you know, let's face it, the education of women and putting us in the workforce, I mean, that's been the biggest contraceptive going.
Oh, without question. But also, again, because we took a different approach to children, we don't see children as economic drivers right now, where we did just 100 years ago. I mean, the fact that my grandfather was working in the mines of Western Pennsylvania at the age of 14, that doesn't exist anymore.
And how long did
No,
he last in that sector?
in the mines,
or
he worked in
or
the,
subsequent careers as
my
well.
grandfather worked in the mines until he went to war, which would have been, I guess he would have gone to war. He's in his early 30s. He was a CB. And, wartime efforts are interesting too, but we'll get to that in a second. Came out of the war and he installed elevators for Westinghouse for his career. He didn't take up the GI Bill, but he was a smart guy and built a really wonderful, comfortable middle class lifestyle with his wife, my grandmother, who was an elementary school teacher. And he lived until he was 90, almost 91 years old. So, you know, that's the thing. My grandfather should not have survived.
The
He was one of
mines, when
he
he
was
spent
one
so many
well,
years with his lungs
but
down the
like
pits.
but prior to our modern period where we're living now, what the world my grandfather grew up in, 1 out of 3 kids died before the age of one. One out of four by the age of one out of three by the age of five, and only about half survived until adulthood. So we had incredibly high birth rates, in part because the odds were that the kids were going to die before they made it to adulthood. And those odds were incredibly high for lower income populations. So having a lot of kids, there was an economic side to it. We also, as you said, quite rightly, we lived in a very traditional society
Yeah.
where women had specific gendered roles. Women's job was to make babies, tend to the home,
And
period.
secure their future, you know, because the kids would take care of them. That's always been the social
That
norm.
that has been the social norm. Obviously, that's dwindled, not completely, but it has dwindled. The state has taken on a bit more of that. But that's why I think we're kind of in this weird inflection period right now, because women in particular are being pulled in just about every single direction possible. Gendered roles have managed to persist even though women are actively engaged in work. There are
Mhm.
hopeful signals that there have been some changes to the family dynamic, with men taking on a greater responsibility of tending to children, tending to the home, but it's still not equal.
Well, look at
Um,
COVID, just put
well,
paid to the lie of that. You know,
that is
who's been
put a
shoved
very
out of the
fine
workforce
point.
because of the pandemic? It's women more than men. I mean, there's so many different nuances to all of this. But,
Sure.
I love this zooming out to the big picture with you because some of the statistics are startling because
Mhm.
Cuba, tell me about Cuba and Vietnam and Thailand, countries we would have thought would be replenishing their young
Yeah.
rather automatically.
Now, once we fixed infant mortality in the West, in the industrialized nations, we then exported it to developing ones, and we did so quickly through organizations like the World Food Program, the World Health Organization. We've basically solved for youth mortality worldwide. There are still some problems where a lot of kids die in certain places, but for the most part, the birth rates have adjusted to meet the new realities. It's one thing if you have 8 kids and half of them survive into adulthood, you're only really taking care of 4. Well, in the modern era, if you're pretty much guaranteed that 4 are going to survive, you're not going to have more than 4 kids. It's just rational actor thinking. Um, and because of the increased expense of having children, because of the education of women entering the workforce, that's happened in developing countries as well. It's not exclusive to the West. It's not exclusive to industrialized nations. So you do see countries that you would never think of being old or getting old becoming very old very quickly. Cuba in particular, a country that we think of as a young country, is going to be entering the super age, this period where 1 out of 5 citizens will be over the age of 65 by the end of this decade. It'll join 34 other economies, including the US, China, and Japan, which is already there. People are astonished when I tell them that last year, the United States recorded its lowest birth rate on record, as long as we've been capturing birth rates, the lowest. China, one of the largest economies in the world, had a population contraction for the first time since 1949 during the Great Famine. And Japan,
And this was last year.
this was
They had
last
this
year,
contraction. I
and
mean, that's astonishing.
it barely
That
registered in the
is
news.
absolutely incredible. And
And, and then
wow.
Japan, which is the third largest economy in the world, has been losing population now for a decade. Japan loses about 500,000 people a year, because they don't have high birth rates, and the population is just aging out, essentially. So where many populations look like pillars, in Japan it's starting to look like an inverted pyramid.
Wow.
And it's hard to see if you travel like me. It's hard to see when you go to these big cities this shift in population, because big cities are still relatively young. Where you see demographic dystopia, the realities of this new era that have gone unchecked, well, you need to go to the countryside. And that's where you really see demographic change, this depopulation, the worst part of this period, unchecked.
Are
That's
you talking
all
across the board or just in the US?
across the board.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, and you'll have to excuse me, I forget the name of the town, but it's in my book. It's commonly referred to as the Valley of the Dolls, and it has
Skimmed
this
over
name.
that bit. Sorry.
it
Didn't do
has
that. Oh.
it has this name because depopulation has been so severe there that the youngest person now is in their 60s that lives there. And in order to make the town more welcoming, the townspeople have actually constructed scarecrows of the people that are no longer there, and have placed them in the schools, which are no longer open, in the fields where people no longer till,
Oh, my
in the
word.
factories where the people no longer work. It's really disturbing to see.
It's for the Martians who are about to land and saying, where are all the people? Where have all the
this is
people gone?
this is what civilization looked like. No,
Oh, my word.
it's everywhere. And I think, you're based in the UK. There are some very good things that are happening in the countryside. There are approaches, especially in the north, to engage populations that are still living in the countryside. I think uh, there are good examples that exist throughout,
Now
and
there are
there's good,
lots of action, multi-generational initiatives
yeah,
and
and I think
co-housing and all that kind of stuff. It's
right, but
really
also you
taken off in the UK.
also really utilizing existing infrastructure. I think that's one of the big themes for the
Sorry, Smudge
futures.
is really insisting. I mean, honestly, every single video, but you can't keep them out or they'd be
No.
crying at the door, and that sort of audio isn't really welcome. I've got another cat, and Arlo will be along any minute. They are tag team. So
Oh,
sorry about
sure.
that. Yeah. They're very pretty to look at, though, so a
Yeah.
nice enough distraction. So go ahead.
I I think that the part of the new period is of course innovating and building new, but a lot of the new period is also reinventing the old, reinventing and using the infrastructure that we have in place already. Japan's been very good at pivoting its postal service to check in on people that
Oh,
may be
really? I didn't
Yeah,
know that.
yeah. It's they do a watch over service, and it's a small fee, and the postal service is required to deliver mail. So now you can have services delivered through the postal service, and
So how does that work? It's not panic alarms. It's not. Is the postie yelling through the door, Mabel, are you okay?
basically just checking in on folks.
Really?
And that provides a degree of social interaction that can help stave off isolation.
Oh, that's
Um,
so much better than reading about the rise and rise of the robots that aren't going to caress you and hold your hand
right.
and give you a hug.
Don't get me wrong here. Japan's doing that too. Japan is attempting to, like I said, augment their workforce with robotics. And I've seen firsthand robotics being used in nursing homes. And
To
it's,
good effect.
I would say, the mixed effect. There is so much that's better, that's human right now. Um, Whether or not we can build empathy into robotics through AI, that's to be determined. I think we're going to get close to that, but there's nothing. It's really hard to match the human touch, the warmth of a
Absolutely. And
hand,
this is,
the
yeah.
the 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 person that can listen to you and give you real time feedback. But technology has shown at this point to really help with isolation. um, Audio devices, Amazon, Google Home, etc. They are used now with at-risk populations, populations at risk for social isolation, and
Yeah,
just being able
absolutely.
to
To
get
deliver
feedback.
things over valleys and ravines. And I think robo vacuums, I mean, they'd be really good to get some of the drudge out of
Yeah.
caring for people who need, let's say, full-time residential care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I'm
you
not
can
talking
turn
about retirement villages, but
totally.
when people are frail and at the end of their lives and they absolutely need some human help, maybe a hybrid mix.
Well, I think what people haven't quite caught on to yet is that all of the elements, at least within urban and some suburban areas, all of the elements to live independently for a very long period of time are already in place. So when you talk about the nursing home industry, the assisted living care industry, all of that residential care, they're being disrupted not by new models of care necessarily, but the fact that you can have a la carte services now delivered into your home. I didn't feel like going to get my prescription the other day at the pharmacy, and I just clicked a button, and within a day, it was at my front door.
Yeah.
So we can get groceries, we can order maid service, food takeout, all on our phone. Um, that is what the future is going to look a lot more like. People not necessarily having a visiting nurse stop by every day unless they absolutely need care, but somebody who checks in on a regular basis. We'll need to find greater efficiencies in order to make these systems work. Because
Yeah.
you're right, there are just not enough people to go around, and these jobs are tough. These
And we
jobs
need
are
to
tough.
change the landscape of where these things are too, because I'm always mentioning in my interview with Mark Friedman, he was talking about Youngtown and Sun City and
Mm-hmm.
Arizona, and we warehouse the older people in these far-flung places away from
Mm-hmm.
amenities, and that's
Oh
got to change
yes,
because a concierge service, there's going to have to be an upside to make the business case.
I agree.
Like the postal service, they're going to have to meld it in, wrap it into existing services. And
Mm-hmm.
that means you can't be warehoused well away from the rest of humanity to
No,
take advantage of
it's
the
just not healthy.
recalibration of this. No,
It's just
it's
not
not healthy
healthy.
at all. No.
And you're right. There were a handful, three people maybe, that really influenced this decision to move older people away and warehouse them, basically treat them as a separate and distinct class. And they emerged during the middle century. And much of the mess that we're dealing with today is what they created, the Sun Cities of the world, this retirement class, as you've mentioned. We're dealing with the legacy of what they created for a world that no longer exists. And if we don't adjust our thinking and our doing, more importantly, because I think our thinking is getting there at this point, but our doing is much harder. We're not going to meet the demands of this new period of man.
No, well, the structural lag and the internalized messaging within our own heads, that lag. Prof. Andrew Scott, I love the quote he did in our interview a couple of years ago. He said, I've often said retirement is a relic. It's dead. Retirement as we knew it, with the, comfy pensions and let's go golfing and let's take another cruise and na. Not that that's, if you can afford it and that's the lifestyle that you've been conditioned to think is shiny and over there and you want to have it, fine. A lot of people can still afford that. But Andrew Scott said, people need to focus on recreation, not recreation, to secure their position in society and to find the things that do give them purpose and a sense of belonging to the larger fabric of their communities.
Absolutely. Andrew was a big inspiration for this book, because his work with Linda Grattan was seminal, seminal, rather. We can talk about purpose until we're blue in the face. At the end of the day, work breeds good health and purpose breeds a brighter future. That's it. And there is data that backs that up now, that if we stay engaged in work, in society, we stay healthy, period. Yes. And I don't know, I'm a pragmatist at the end of the day, and I have no interest in getting sick. It doesn't thrill me. I don't want to die a long, slow, painful death. And the one way I know I can combat that is by staying engaged, constantly reinventing myself, and staying socially connected. Those things, they're like taking medicine each day. Yes. They're like getting sunshine and water. Like, they need to be integrated into your life every single moment of every single day. The second you give up, the second you buy into the ageism that it can somehow control you, that's when you've given in. And then you should just let death come. And it will come slowly and painfully, and it'll be awful.
Yeah, but after a cluster of chronic diseases, that lifestyle choices and staying engaged and socially connected. But it is hard as you get older. I even know. I had a pretty shit Christmas. Yeah. I always feel grief-stricken, because I've lost the love of my life. It's been a fair few years ago, but I still find on the holidays and the New Year's, I try my best. I really try to, shake yourself out of it, Susan. But it's always a difficult period for me because my family's in Cape Town. But even if I was with them, and all of the obvious points on that, when you are still alone after the death of your partner and you haven't made children, because we didn't. Anyway, I've said openly, I had 4 miscarriages and I was on my last eggs when we lost the last baby just before my partner was diagnosed with malignant melanoma. And I'm not putting that out there again as, a morbid slice, but that's the way life happens for people. Things happen when you least expect them.
There are absolute realities that happen. Part of being a successful human is being resilient. And from what I know of you, you've shown great resiliency throughout your life. Life doesn't get easier when we get older. It may in many ways get harder because of the world that's been built around us.
We try to stay connected and we kick ourselves and, we try to follow all of the good advice, but you have to allow yourself the downtime as well, to be a bit down, to I did over Christmas. I thought, I should be putting out a tweet that says, Happy New Year. Rah, rah, rah. And I said, I don't feel like it.
Be human.
Yeah, I just didn't feel like it.
But you have to, I think all of us need to remember that life is a marathon. It's not a sprint. We have to be able to have those down times, understand that they exist. We have to figure out how to muster through them, so that we can have the good times. One of the greatest gifts that I've built into my life is ensuring that my friends are, and my circle of friends are intergenerational, um, so that I can ensure that I don't have a position where my friends keep dying off around me.
Oh, wow. Very
Rather, they will
strategic,
all.
that.
Well, it's a bit strategic. I also get such energy from different groups of people, whether they be my 75, 80-year-old friends that have been on this planet twice as long as me, or the young men and women in their 20s that are just really starting out in their professional career. I
Yes.
get so much energy from all of them. And there's a bit of stability that comes from building a friend group, building a network of people that are diverse in generations.
Yeah.
It is planning in a way for the future, because I don't have kids either, and I don't think we're going to have children. We're just not focused on that at this point.
Yeah. It's the elixir of life,
It is.
and the thing is, multi-generational, it's ridiculous how we moved so far away from that. And there are so many factors involved in that: the fragmentation of the labor force,
Mm-hmm.
globalization, you know, offshoring of the
Sure.
manufacturing base. Everything has been disrupted in the last 100 years. It's
Mm-hmm.
not just we've doubled our longevity, our lifespan, and maybe not the health span so much, but everything has been disrupted to the max. So now
Yes.
it just feels like now we need to draw things back, and we need to allow people to be and live. And especially, I think the pandemic has so many of us reflecting on, what are my choices?
Sure.
Really forcing all of us to have a period of introspection that doesn't last forever, which is my
Mm-hmm.
big, it's a bee in my bonnet when people say, oh, you must do this and do that and find your why. And okay, find your why, but then move forward with it.
Yeah.
I don't get this constant analysis paralysis. It absolutely drives me mad in this space because, this optimization, self optimization, for me equals self absorption.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, I quote Mark Friedman: biology not only flows downhill, but it also flows outward. And
Mm-hmm.
you were making the point. You make a point to stay socially connected.
Mm-hmm.
It flows out from you, and you lose your self absorption when you start to think about what the neighbor needs.
Right.
What can be my role through the pandemic? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I was boxing up food at the local food bank, and I loved it.
Right.
It's sort of eased down, and I'm not doing it anymore. But I will definitely look them up. I mean, actually, I'm going to look them up this week because if they
Well,
need
the
more help, I loved it.
the New York Times ran a piece just last week, that explicitly pointed to data that said, volunteering can help cure the pangs of isolation,
Yeah.
which is huge. Um, I think it's something that's a good thing for us to do. We're better when we're connected. We're better when we're curious. When we lose those parts of us, I think we start to lose a bit of our humanity, and our longevity begins to slip away. We start to lose our ability to be relevant and be respected. I think, you know, life is not easy. It's
No.
not designed that way. And I'm not quite sure where we got into this idea. Maybe it's because of the retirement class. I haven't quite landed on a full understanding of how we got to this point where we expected that old age brought us stability or comfort.
No, and we've
Um,
got nomad land, and we've got all kinds of examples of pensioner poverty, which is what
exactly.
it's called here. Not everyone is rolling in dough. I've
No.
had a blessed life. Yes, I've lost my partner, I've lost my parents, and like everyone, as the years roll along, we have some unsavory slices that we have to deal with, and as you said, be resilient. But in general, I mean, I've had a fabulous career, all kinds of interesting moments in my life that I've been blessed by. But yeah, there are also the downsides, and we just all need to get rid of this Hallmark card
Yeah.
version of life. And,
Well,
the media keeps shoving it our way. Not the
right.
media, advertising
Just
and
we
magazines and
we are so caught in this feedback loop of what retirement looks like. Retirement is a construct. It is a
yes.
complete construct. It was designed by white people for white people. And that's why when I say retirement, the first thing that doesn't come to your head is a white couple walking down a sandy beach, then I don't know what you're thinking, because that is the only image that conjures when you think retirement these days.
Completely.
Maybe
Sometimes
on a
it's
golf
morning.
course.
Yeah, absolutely. Most
I mean,
times it's sunset.
maybe you'll get a grandkid in the photo. I mean, it's just like, it's so trite. And the reality is that older populations are the most diverse populations on this planet,
Yes.
because we are like trees. The longer we grow, the longer we're on this earth, the more different we look. And that's a beautiful thing if we lean into it. But if we continue this kind of Hallmark card BS that all old people are having this blissful retirement on a beach somewhere, which sounds like hell to me, um, then we're not going to be able to break free of the chains of this reality, this artificial reality that we've created over the past 100 years.
Well,
I
it's
don't
like
know.
another one of my guests.
Do you watch the Golden Girls?
Oh, I
I mean,
did before. Yeah.
we lost Rosen Island
Yeah.
this week, Betty White, and that's a travesty. But you know what's amazing about that show is that it was so prescient in its writing and how it talked about old age
Yeah.
and retirement. Because at the onset of that show, it was four older women that kind of came together and appeared to have a pretty comfortable retirement. But by the time that show is wrapping, that last season of the show, they really get into ageism. They really get into challenges around
Oh,
finances and
wow. I'm going to
money.
have to dig it up.
Oh, go back and watch it, because hey, I'm a gay man. I love that show. It's like our Bible. But I gotta say, seriously, go back and watch it, because it's a primer for the challenges that this group of women who appear to be quite comfortable, they don't have. Betty White's character, I think it was so prescient, talks about how her husband was a wonderful man, but he was terrible at money. And she based her financial future off him. I say in the book, men, husbands, they're a terrible retirement plan.
Yes,
Like, just,
absolutely.
you got to think about your future as yourself. Your money, your future is dictated by you, not always by somebody else.
Yeah, well, the social rule book has been flipped around and changed and chopped and changed, and there are very few of the original pages left in it. And I
Yeah.
just want to say, I haven't mentioned this because I always have these ideas, my former news background and making documentaries, and they say, oh, well, I'd really like to do this and do that. And then I realize, Susan, you're a team of one, and you
Yeah.
aren't going to be able to do the full page magazine spread documentary on this unless you get, going with this. But I always want to dig into sort of like the Golden Girls, because I'm
Mhm.
planning to do that. I've got some very dear friends, and we've been plotting for the last couple of years to not get some remote pile, some derelict chateau in the French countryside, but somewhere on the suburban fringe of
Sure.
a happening city in France, and go
Hmm.
there. And we are going to live commune style. There's only three of us,
Yeah.
but there might be some add-ons as we go. And that plan is actually
Uh-huh.
really taking shape now. I'm hoping that I can press go on it within the next 6 months and do a Golden Girls version of living, which has nothing to do with the script that we're force fed from the
Right.
minute we're born.
No, the co-housing is the future. There's no question about it, especially as we have moved away in many cases from a traditional household where multiple generations live together, where there are those children, as we mentioned earlier, that help take care of the parents at the end. That doesn't exist for a lot of us anymore. So we do need to develop new models. It's simply essential.
Yeah.
And if we want to, retire with our friends to a commune or in a home or, even within a community, that's okay. Like, find what works for you, because again, risk has shifted. Institutions are not giving us what they gave us before.
Yeah.
Things like Social Security, pensions are not going to be as strong. The cost of healthcare is increasing. So if we're going to get through this period, we're going to have to do it together, and we're going to have to think about things differently. My retirement will not look like my grandparents. It will not look like my parents. It will look like my retirement.
And what are you thinking?
And
Any early plans? You're under what? Are you what?
I,
Under 40?
I'm 44. I'm
Oh, right.
44. Yeah.
So have
And
you got any thoughts about what it looks like?
I mean, our friends have always discussed, a type of commune living. What I think is interesting within the gay community, at least, we lost so many men to HIV/AIDS, but those that survived, they really live in what we call naturally occurring retirement communities, and they're typically within urban areas. Um, and Washington D.C., my hometown, we have an area of the city called DuPont Circle, and DuPont Circle is the gay community. And it's interesting, these men live in these apartment buildings or condo buildings or homes, and they come downstairs for breakfast to the local cafe, and they go have their social time, and then they go back to their homes. They come back for lunch, they go back for dinner. It's no different than a retirement community. It's just happening organically and not cast off to the suburbs or cast off the exurbs.
Right.
These men and women are living with us. They are part of us because they are humans. They belong in our communities.
And they have extended families as well. And,
Absolutely.
the generations mix in.
Absolutely. And that generational diversity is, to me, such an important key of our future, our collective future. We have to lean into it. And there are many areas of hope for this. I think it's fair for us to take a look back at the past century and say, we screwed up on quite a few things.
Yeah.
We can make it right. And the erasure of older people from society, which was in large part driven by economics, that was a mistake. We screwed up.
Yeah.
Let's just own it.
That's exactly
Let's
what
own
Mark
it.
Friedman said. I'm quoted him how many times now? Half a dozen. I'll have to let him know. But he said we screwed up magnificently.
We did. We
And
did a
age
bad job.
apartheid, yeah, it's awful. And now these things are embedded. I mean, I get
Mhm.
so tired of people always saying, "Oh, I feel really old." And I realize now, 3 years down the line, though, of the big middle, that I'm not going to rehabilitate that word. I don't have Joe Rogan's audience. I don't have Tim Ferriss's audience. I
Right.
haven't written 700 books. But we need to rehabilitate that word. But maybe that's, a mission too far. But we need to erase the ageism that we have internalized, where
Yes.
we all, I mean, too many of us, oh, I'm 55, now I'm 65, and now I'm 75.
Yeah.
So I can't do that. I can't do this. We don't want you to go skydiving. Those are the
No.
outliers. But stay engaged, be happy, laugh, enjoy yourself.
Yeah.
I just don't understand this curling up mentality that we've created, our culture has
Yeah.
created.
Well, and I think this almost brings our conversation full circle, and that's the themes that are in the book are everyone has a role to play in our collective future. Every single one of us, from our biggest institutions, our governments, our businesses, to our cities and communities, to our individual citizens, we all have a role. And if you think for one freaking minute that you don't have a role in this future, you're sorely mistaken. We're going to need all hands on deck in this new period. And that includes, the newborns to the 90-year-olds and over. Um, Everyone's part of this.
Yeah, and start to honor the multi-stage life that we've got
Yes.
going. But let's just finish with this. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I just was I don't know, you could probably see my eyes scrolling through the long list of questions that I prepared, which I ditched, which always happens. But this last one, what are your best ideas for how we make this demographic upheaval sexy? And sexy is the wrong word, but people know exactly what I mean. How do we reach the masses with it? Because it's just not resonating with the general public, because we all have the precarity of now, the existential angst of now,
Yeah.
and during and after the pandemic. So how do we get people away from the short-termism and say, wow, I really need to start thinking about my longer term life and how I'm going to, and my kids and all
Yeah.
of
I
it,
mean,
the
I
bigger
think for,
pie.
I think for individuals, it's on the individual, but for the businesses and the governments that are really gonna be the change, drive the change. I mean, I can only think of Cabaret. Money, 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 money. Money
Yeah,
makes the world go round.
I
And
know.
there is a great opportunity here. There is a massive economic opportunity here for businesses in particular to not only tap into the wealth of this generation, and it is unequal, don't get me wrong, but there still is a lot of wealth in older populations, but also to tap into the economic potential of this group of people. And we talk a lot about hope. We've talked a lot about hope through this conversation today. And let me tell you what gives me hope. Hope is the CEO of Whirlpool in an interview on Jim Cramer, and Jim Cramer runs a money show on one of the major networks in the US.
Oh,
It's the CEO of one of America's greatest manufacturers, Whirlpool, talking about demographic change and how it's affecting his bottom line and how he sees issues that are relatively systemic right now in the labor force becoming structural and affecting not only the labor force, but market conditions that allow people to purchase goods. That's sexy to me.
yeah.
Because all of a sudden now you have a CEO of a major American corporation leaning into this idea that there's value in old age, that there's value in our demographic destiny. And if we focus in on it, if we embrace it, we give it a big warm hug and we figure out what to do with it, we're all going to be better off.
But okay, I don't mean to be a contrarian, but what I'm hearing from you is, isn't that just we're going to buy more stuff that we don't need,
No,
that's
it
going to
just
go into landfill, that's going to,
no, it means that we're
and
going to
we,
become more engaged. It's a new opportunity. Older populations tend to be more focused on experiential engagements, travel, what have you.
mm,
There's a brand new economy that's emerging around the circular economy and buying and selling of goods that are already made. It's fascinating how that's become a marketplace, a way for people to earn money
yeah, I
in
watched
later
a video
life.
on the BBC website just yesterday about I don't even know where it was. It was just one of those things that washes over you. And he was recycling hair, huge vats of hair from hairdressers.
Yeah. I mean,
Literally, and
there,
it was getting into all kinds of products. And apparently, there may already be a road angle,
mhm.
and roofing angle. And I mean, this is what we need to see from a
Yeah.
sustainability
And I'm
view.
not talking, and I don't want to, for anyone to think that I'm coming off as saying buy more stuff. That's not it. But if we take too many people out of the workforce, we're taking out potential consumers. And if we move people to fixed incomes that are very strict, they're not going to be buying products or services. They're not going to be pushing money back into the marketplace.
Which is happening
And
now.
which is that's exactly what's happening now. So we've got to keep people in for our economic health, but also our individual physical health as well. Like all of this works together. It's an ecosystem. And our ecosystem is sick right now. Um, there are some glimmers of hope for change. They're happening within some big companies, some smaller ones too. But this is going to be a slog. But it's going to be great when we come out of it.
Yeah, well, we just need to get the policymakers and governments to quit chipping and chopping away at public spending. I mean, in
Yeah,
this country, we had 10 years of austerity. And if you read the Marmot Review, I mean,
I have.
yeah, it's incredible. And the deaths of despair and all of the
Yeah.
rest. I mean, anyway, I don't
But
want
you
to
know,
end on a down.
a really good way to solve for that though is to get more people working. More people
Exactly.
working means more people paying taxes, less people on the dole.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
if we're
it's
happy and joyful and filling our lives as we have grown accustomed to,
right.
we will not be taking up hospital beds. And
Exactly.
we will be. That's why I also veered, when I was doing this, my starting point, but it's very free range, my podcast. I've been doing a lot on healthy longevity because,
Hmm.
we've got the COVID pandemic, we've also got the obesity pandemic and
Sure.
metabolic syndrome. And, this is what is shortening lives. So we can live healthy longer, but the longer we live healthy and extend our health spans, the better we'll be if we can compress morbidity into the very end of life.
Absolutely.
And we
And
can keep contributing.
absolutely. And there's hope on that front too. Not only are there social interventions that we can take on ourselves today, economic ones, staying engaged, but there's this whole new group of science, people who are funding and doing science around extending healthy years. We should be excited about this period. I mean, I know it sounds like we're going to be in a bumpy patch.
Yeah.
Any period of change is a bumpy patch.
Yeah.
But when we come out of it, it's going to look awfully good.
It sure
Um,
is. Yeah.
it sure is.
It sure is. I hope in my lifetime, because I'm old now. And I don't mind saying that as a negative. It's not a
Right.
negative, but I am. I'm in my 60s. I'm old now. I mean, by any definition. But I certainly don't feel dried up and, ready to withdraw and retire and all the rest. I want to be out
Mhm.
there doing all kinds of, I'm going to be moving to France hopefully in 6 months.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
new chapter, new life, new everything. But I realize completely that not everybody shares this resilience and this thirst for adventure. A lot of
Yeah.
people are so risk averse. And anyway, I'm rabbiting on here, but we are definitely on the same page. And I hope that we can, rest on this hopeful note, and we can go forth and all individually make the changes that will lead us out of any of the negativity around
Yes.
this demographic change.
Right. I think we will.
Bradley, thank you so much. Bradley
Thank you.
Schurman, demographic futurist, longevity strategist, entrepreneur, innovator, and author of The Super Age, Decoding Our Demographic Destiny. In 2 weeks, you'll be on a digital launch. And the book, where can we get your book now?
Amazon, of course, but it is available at most national, international, and local retailers.
Have you done an
So
audiobook?
an audiobook has been done. It is going to be available on Amazon and I believe Barnes and Noble, but I'd have to double check that for you. Definitely on Amazon because you can buy it today.
Yeah, fantastic. And it's a really good read. I mean,
Thank
you
you.
won't be able to rush through it. It's not a novel, but it's lovely to dip in, have a
Mhm.
chapter and then watch Netflix. That's the way I did it. And I am going to look. What page is the Valley of the Dolls reference on?
It's in the chapter on our rural communities. So chapter 7 or 8, I think.
I love that.
Uh,
A newly minted author who knows his work inside out. Fantastic. So often
Thank
people
you.
go, "Oh, I don't remember. Did I write that?"
Now there's a whole chapter on our rural communities called Canaries in the Coal Mine. So
Right.
it gets to
Okay.
what's happening in the countryside. So
Digging into that then. Thank you so much. Oh, and by the way,
thank you.
too, are you most active on Twitter or Instagram
I am
or?
most active on LinkedIn of all places.
Oh, wow.
I think it is the most civil of our platforms.
Mm.
And this is primarily a business book, but anybody can read it. It's conversational in its style. You can find me on Twitter, but I think if you want the deeper insights, find me on LinkedIn.
Okay, fantastic. Definitely be following you after I close this recording. So many thanks for your company, you out there who've enjoyed this podcast. And I'm going to say that thing that all podcasters seem to do. Please subscribe, rate, review. It really does help because I sort of, I've got really good download numbers, but, I'm not nipping at Tim Ferriss's heels by any
Yeah.
stretch. But then again, I also know I can't be on social media 24/7. I need to read the books of people like you,
Mhm.
Bradley. So that's my excuse at any rate. So until next time, go well. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye. Thank you.